Margaret thought Nathan Brooks crossed that market every Sunday for her apple cinnamon pie. So why did the quiet cowboy keep coming back after the pie stopped being the reason? The pie tin slammed against the wooden table. Women turned. Margaret felt the grain bite beneath her palms as one cruel sentence hung in the cold Montana air. Across the market, Nathan Brooks was walking toward her again. Only this time he wasn't looking at the pies. What did he want? Tell me where you're watching from. Margaret Dawson slammed the last pie tin onto the church market table hard enough to rattle the wooden legs. The sound carried farther than she meant it to. Conversations stopped. A coffee cup paused halfway to an old rancher's mouth. Two women near the quilt stall turned at once. Margaret kept both palms pressed against the table. She had just heard a woman behind her say, almost pleasantly, "Nobody's ever going to love a woman built like that." Another voice had answered with a low laugh. Margaret did not turn around. She did not cry. She looked instead at the neat rows of golden crusts before her, at the flour dusting the front of her blue dress, at the clean white cloth she had ironed twice the night before. Then she drew one slow breath, straightened the cloth, and when an elderly man stepped uncertainly toward the table, she lifted her head. "Morning, Mr. Calloway. Sweet potato or apple today?" 3 weeks earlier, there had been no market table, only Margaret's kitchen, her mother's empty chair, and a money box containing less than $20. Outside, September wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the house. The Montana foothills beyond Willow Creek had already begun showing pale streaks of early snow. Margaret sat at the scarred kitchen table with a pencil in one hand and her mother's recipe book beneath the other. The book was old enough that the cloth binding had worn through at the corners. Margaret knew every stain on every page: blackberry juice, molasses, butter, one dark coffee mark her mother had complained about for 20 years. 3 weeks before, those hands had pressed the book into Margaret's. "You make beautiful things, Margaret." Her mother's voice had barely been more than breath. "Don't you let anybody tell you different." Margaret had smiled, because dying women deserved peace. She had not believed her. Now there was rent, coal, flour, lamp oil, and a horse named Molly who would need winter feed. Margaret could sell Molly. She wrote the number down, then crossed it out. She could ask her cousin in Billings for help. She did not write that down at all. Instead, she opened the recipe book to apple cinnamon. The first Sunday she drove into Willow Creek before sunrise. Molly's breath smoked in the cold, while wagon wheels clicked over the hard road. Margaret arrived while the church windows were still dark, and the market square smelled of damp boards and horse manure. She carried 6 pies herself: apple cinnamon, blackberry, peach, sweet potato, 2 plain apple. She arranged them carefully. Then she waited. People came after church. Some looked at the pies. Some looked at Margaret. Most kept walking. 2 women stopped near the preserves table 20 feet away. "That's Margaret Dawson." "I know. She seems bigger than last year." Margaret adjusted the corner of the cloth. By noon, she had sold 2 pies. Mr. Calloway bought the sweet potato. A traveler from Helena bought blackberry because, as she said, "That smells too good to leave behind." Margaret drove home with 4 pies and $9 tucked inside her apron. That evening, she ate cold apple pie at her mother's table. The house made different sounds now. The stove ticked. The wind touched the window frame. Nothing else. She considered housekeeping work, selling Molly, writing billings. Then she looked at the 4 pies. "Waste of good butter," she murmured. The next Sunday, she went back. That was when Nathan Brooks first stopped at her table. Margaret did not know his name yet. She noticed only that he was around 40, tall without seeming to use it, with a brown coat worn pale at the elbows and dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. His hands told her more. Rope calluses, a healed cut across one knuckle, cowboy hands. He looked at the pies instead of at her body. "How much?" $2. He pointed to the apple cinnamon. Margaret wrapped it. He counted $2 onto the table exactly. No bargaining, no kindness performed for an audience. He took the pie, gave her one measured nod, and walked away. Margaret forgot about him by Monday. Mostly. The following Sunday he came again. Peach this time. The Sunday after that, blackberry. Then apple cinnamon again. By the fourth week, Margaret caught herself setting the freshest apple cinnamon near the front before the church doors had even opened. She stared at it. A man likes pie, she told herself. That is all. Around 9:30, Reverend Aldous stopped beside her table. He followed Margaret's glance without appearing to. "Nathan Brooks," he said mildly. Margaret looked at him. "I didn't ask." "No, ma'am." The Reverend hid a smile. "Ranch north of Willow Creek. Widower. 2 girls, Emily and Rose." Then he moved on. Across the market, Clara Hutchkins stood outside the dry goods stall. She had noticed too. Margaret wished suddenly that she had not. Nathan arrived at his usual time. He picked up the apple cinnamon, but this time he did not leave. He looked at Margaret. "You make these yourself?" It was the first question he had ever asked her. "From scratch," she said. "Crust, too." His thumb rested against the edge of the wrapped tin. "My daughters talk about them every Sunday." Margaret had no answer ready. Nathan gave her that same quiet nod and walked toward the hitching rail. She stood behind the pie table watching him go, and for reasons she could not yet explain, those few plain words hurt less than kindness usually did. The next Saturday, Margaret made 2 sweet potato pies. She told herself the second was practical. Sweet potato kept well in the cold, and Mr. Calloway sometimes bought one. But when Nathan Brooks arrived Sunday morning and reached for his usual apple cinnamon, Margaret heard herself say, "I made sweet potato too. Your daughters might like it." Nathan glanced toward the darker crust. "Rosewood." "The younger one?" "7. She'd choose sweet over sensible every time." Margaret almost smiled. Nathan bought both. Full price, as always. By then, his visits had become regular enough for Willow Creek to notice. So had Clara Hutchkins. Clara stopped one Sunday with 2 women beside her and examined Margaret's table as though inspecting flour for weevils. "I do wonder what keeps Nathan Brooks coming here every week." Margaret met her eyes. "The pie, I expect." Clara's gaze traveled over her slowly. "Of course." Margaret understood the rest without hearing it. "My pies are $2, Mrs. Hutchkins." "I don't think so." "Then good morning." Clara walked away. Margaret kept her hands flat against the table until they stopped wanting to shake. 2 Sundays later, 3 boys gathered near the stall while Margaret wrapped a blackberry pie for Mrs. Henderson. One boy puffed his cheeks and exaggerated Margaret's walk. The others laughed. Margaret kept folding the cloth. Mrs. Henderson did not. "You boys ought to be ashamed." They scattered. "Boys will be boys," Margaret murmured. Mrs. Henderson handed over $2. "That's no excuse." Nathan arrived 20 minutes later. Something in his face had changed. He asked which pie she recommended. "The peach." "I'll trust you." She wrapped it. Nathan paid, then looked toward the road where the boys had disappeared. Those were probably good boys once. Margaret looked up. Somebody failed them. That was all. No pity, no speech about ignoring cruel people. He simply put the blame where he believed it belonged and carried his pie away. Margaret thought about that sentence for 6 days. The next Sunday, Nathan came with a request. Emily read about dried cherry pie. Dried cherry with almond crust? His eyebrows lifted. "You know it? My mother made one every Christmas." "I don't want to put you out. I'll make it." The crust fought Margaret most of Saturday. She threw away the first batch when the butter softened too much and began again. Sunday morning, she handed Nathan the finished pie. Let it rest before cutting. 20 minutes if it's still warm. He listened closely. Not politely. Closely. Margaret realized he intended to carry those exact instructions home to Emily. Something about that stayed with her. Clara came after Nathan left. I see you're making special pies for him now. For his daughter. Clara's mouth tightened. Margaret, he's not going to marry you. For one heartbeat, the market seemed strangely quiet. Margaret looked at the empty place where Nathan had stood, then back at Clara. I'm selling pie, Mrs. Hutchkins, not marriage. Clara left, but the word stayed. Marriage. Margaret resented her for putting it there. A week later, Nathan arrived with Emily. The girl was 10, narrow as a fence rail, with dark hair escaping its braid and none of her father's talent for silence. You're Margaret? Emily. Nathan's warning carried the tired patience of a man who knew it would accomplish nothing. My crust shrinks. Margaret blinked. What? My apple crust, around the edges. Your butter's probably too warm. Emily leaned closer. And don't stretch the dough into the tin, Margaret continued. Let it fall where it wants. Stretch it going in, it'll shrink coming out. Emily stared. Then she turned toward Nathan. That's what I've been doing. Nathan looked at Margaret. There was gratitude there, but something else too. Something quieter. 2 Sundays later, Rose came. She stayed half behind Nathan's coat, studying Margaret with large, dark eyes. Then she said, Papa says you put kindness in them. Nathan suddenly found the livestock pens very interesting. Margaret looked at him, then back at Rose. Did he? Rose nodded solemnly. Margaret cut a small piece from an extra cinnamon apple pie and handed it over in a folded napkin. Rose took it with both hands. She tasted it, chewed thoughtfully, then looked up. It tastes like Sundays. Margaret's fingers tightened against the table. Nathan still wasn't looking at her, and suddenly she wondered what Sundays meant inside the Brooks house. She almost asked. She didn't. During the weeks that followed, she began noticing Nathan elsewhere. Fixing a loose churchyard hinge after service, checking a mare's foreleg outside the livery, loading his own feed sacks while another rancher stood talking. A working man, not a man performing usefulness. That made him more dangerous to hope about. Then Patricia Haynes came to Margaret's kitchen on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Margaret knew from her face that she had not come for pie. Clara went to Reverend Aldous. Margaret set down her flour scoop. Why? Patricia hesitated. She says you're getting too close to Nathan's girls, that you're trying to ingratiate yourself with a widower's children for personal gain. The kitchen went still. Margaret looked toward her mother's recipe book, then toward the window, where Molly stood beyond the fence under a sky heavy with early snow. There was another market 40 minutes east. Nobody there knew Nathan Brooks. Nobody there knew Clara Hutchkins. Margaret could load the cart Sunday morning and simply turn the horse the other direction. For the first time since Nathan Brooks had walked to her table and asked how much, disappearing seemed easier than returning. She thought about it all Saturday. Then she thought of Emily bending over stubborn pie dough, Rose holding a slice with both hands, Nathan crossing the market every Sunday, as though there were nothing remarkable about choosing her table. Before sunrise, Margaret hitched Molly. She drove toward Willow Creek. Nathan came between 9 and 10. This time he looked at Margaret before he looked at the pies. Clara Hutchkins came to my ranch yesterday. Margaret's hand stopped over the wrapping cloth. She wanted to discuss the situation. What situation? Apparently, where I buy pie has become one. Margaret nearly smiled, but Nathan remained serious. I told her my daughters, my groceries, and the people I welcome are my concern. She stared at him. You didn't have to do that. I know. He held her eyes. That's why I did. Margaret looked down quickly and wrapped his peach pie. Her hands betrayed her with the smallest tremor. Nathan noticed. He said nothing. A week later, Willow Creek began preparing for the Harvest Festival. There would be cattle judging, wagon races, preserves, quilts, children's baking, and the open pie competition. First prize was $40. $40 meant flour and firewood. It meant keeping Molly through winter. Margaret paid the $2 entry fee at the clerk's desk. The night before the festival, she baked 4 pies: apple cinnamon, peach, dried cherry with almond crust, and her mother's sweet potato with a dark molasses edge. Near midnight, Margaret cut one narrow slice from each. The sweet potato settled warm on her tongue. She closed her eyes. Sunday best, she whispered, her mother's pie. That was the one. At dawn, Stand 14 received Margaret Dawson's entry. By 8, the festival grounds were thick with wagons, horses, wood smoke, and voices. Beyond the tents, the foothills carried the first white dusting of winter. Margaret had barely finished arranging her sale pies when Emily came running. I used cold butter. Margaret looked at her flour-smudged sleeve. For your contest? And I didn't stretch it. Later, Margaret stood near the children's tent when the ribbons were announced. 3rd place, 2nd place. Then the judge cleared his throat. 1st place, Emily Brooks. Emily spun around. She did not look for Nathan first. She looked for Margaret. Margaret felt that somewhere deep. Then Rose slipped her hand into Margaret's. No question, no permission, just a small, warm hand deciding where it belonged. Nathan stood several feet away, watching them. For one dangerous moment, Margaret could see the shapes of something she had never permitted herself to imagine. Then Patricia Haynes appeared beside her. Her expression broke the moment apart. Margaret, what happened? Harlan Fitch is reviewing your entry. Margaret's face went still. Reviewing what? Residency. I've lived here 12 years. I know. Across the grounds, Harlan Fitch stood near the registration table with 2 festival officials. Clara Hutchkins was beside him. Margaret understood. The old instinct whispered to leave. Instead, she handed Rose gently back toward Emily. Then she walked. Not quickly, not quietly either. She had paid her fee. She had followed the rules. Stand 14 belonged there. Margaret was 10 feet from the table when Nathan stepped into Harlan Fitch's path. What's the residency question, Harlan? Fitch frowned. Nathan, this is festival business. Margaret Dawson has lived in Willow Creek since 1875. She paid the same $2 everybody else paid. It's procedural. Nathan glanced toward the other entries. Then I expect you're reviewing all 22. Nobody answered. Nathan's voice stayed level. I'd hate for this festival to become known for checking the rules differently depending on who's standing at the table. The silence around them widened. One official looked down. Clara looked away. Fitch's jaw worked once. Her entry is in order. Good. Nathan stepped aside. That was all. He did not speak to the judges. He did not ask for favor. He walked back toward his daughters and left Margaret's pie to stand on its own. At 2 o'clock, the judging began. When Mrs. Cavey reached stand 14, she took one bite, stopped, then took another. Margaret breathed slowly. 40 minutes later, the crowd gathered. 3rd place was announced, then 2nd. Margaret's name had not been called. She prepared herself for the familiar little ache of almost. Then the announcer unfolded the final paper. 1st place, stand 14, Margaret Dawson, sweet potato with molasses edge. For one heartbeat, Willow Creek went silent. Then applause broke unevenly across the tent. Margaret walked toward the platform. Halfway there, she became aware of herself again. Her dress, her shoulders, her body moving beneath 100 eyes. Then she remembered her mother's hands. You make beautiful things, Margaret." She stopped watching herself walk and simply walked. The ribbon was red. The envelope held $40. Mrs. Cavey shook her hand. Margaret turned. Rose was clapping above her head. Emily's whole face was bright. Nathan stood between them. He did not clap. He gave Margaret the same measured nod he had given her the first Sunday. Only now she understood that a nod could hold more than words. That evening, Margaret placed $40 on her kitchen table. She hung the ribbon on a nail beside her mother's recipe book. Then she sat alone while the stove settled into a low red glow. Across Willow Creek, after Emily and Rose were asleep, Nathan Brooks sat at his own kitchen table. He remembered the first pie, the smell when he carried it through the door, the way his daughters had come running. But that was not what troubled him now. He had gone back the second Sunday because Margaret was there, and the third, and every Sunday after. For the first time, Nathan allowed himself to name what had been quietly happening all autumn. He was no longer walking toward a pie table. He was walking toward her. Margaret knew none of that. The next Sunday, she reached the church market before sunrise and found 7 people waiting beside her empty table. She stopped with a pie tin in each hand. A woman near the front smiled. "We heard about the sweet potato." Margaret sold all 8 pies in 40 minutes. At home, she opened her mother's recipe book and began making calculations in the margins. 12 pies next Sunday, more flour, more sweet potatoes, dried cherries Thursday, crusts Friday night. For the first time, she was planning beyond survival. 3 evenings later, Clara Hutchkins knocked on her door. Margaret almost did not recognize the woman standing there without an audience. "I owe you an apology," Clara said. Margaret waited. Clara admitted what she had done. The gossip, Reverend Aldous, Harlan Fitch. She had called it practicality because that sounded better than cruelty. "Why?" Margaret finally asked. Clara looked toward the yard. "Because Nathan Brooks spent 2 years walking past women I considered suitable. Then you put up a pie table, and he kept walking toward you." Margaret said nothing. "I didn't understand it," Clara continued, "so I tried to remove it. You weren't fair to me." "No." Margaret did not forgive her simply because she had apologized, but she opened the door another inch. "Thank you for saying it plainly. That was enough." On Sunday, Nathan came at his usual time. He bought 2 sweet potato pies and the dried cherry almond. Then he remained beside the table. "The girls want to know if you'd come to dinner Friday." Margaret looked up. "Dinner?" "Just dinner." Every cautious part of her began assembling reasons to refuse. "Yes." The answer escaped before the reasons were ready. Nathan's mouth moved at one corner. 6 o'clock. Friday night, the Brooks Ranch glowed against the cold like something drawn in lamplight. Margaret arrived carrying a sweet potato pie. Emily opened the door before the second knock. "You brought pie." "I did. I told Papa you would." Behind her, Nathan sighed. Rose appeared and immediately took Margaret's free hand. "I want to show you my room." "After dinner," Nathan said. Rose considered the ruling. After dinner. The house smelled of venison stew, cornbread, and wood smoke. Children's books lay open near the stove. 2 pairs of small boots sat crooked beneath the coat pegs. A bridle hung near the back room waiting for repair. Nothing was arranged for Margaret's benefit. It was simply a home. That made sitting at the table harder than she expected. Nathan served stew. Emily talked about school. Rose ate quietly. Nobody treated Margaret as a guest who needed entertaining. They simply made room. After supper, Emily read aloud while Rose settled beside Margaret and slowly leaned against her arm. Margaret went still. Across the table, Nathan noticed. "Is this all right?" Margaret looked down at Rose. "Yes." Something in Nathan's shoulders loosened. Later, when both girls were in bed, he returned to the kitchen. The lamp burned low between them. I need to tell you why I bought that first pie. Margaret waited. When Eleanor was alive, she baked on Sundays, mostly bread, sometimes cake. His hand rested flat against the table. After she died, Sundays went hollow. He tried work, church, keeping busy. Nothing changed the silence in the house. Then I saw you. Margaret's breath caught. You were straightening that tablecloth before anybody came. Standing there alone like showing up still mattered. He bought the apple cinnamon pie. When he carried it home, the kitchen filled with warm spice. Emily and Rose came running. For the first time in years, Sunday smelled like something was happening. Margaret understood, or thought she did. So the pies reminded you of Eleanor. The first one did. Nathan's answer came gently. Margaret looked at him. The first pie made me stop. A pause. You made me come back. He saw the uncertainty in her face. I wasn't going to hand you somebody else's grief and call it affection. You deserved better than that. Margaret lowered her eyes. I nearly quit after the second Sunday. Nathan said nothing. I spent most of my life believing wanting less was safer. You don't have to know how to want everything tonight. She looked up. What do I have to do? Come back next Sunday. Same as always? Same as always. So she did. And Friday dinners followed. Winter edged closer. Margaret watched Nathan ride the north pasture before dawn. Repair fence in frozen ground and quiet a nervous mare with one hand against its neck. Nathan watched Margaret turn 8 pies into 12, then special orders, then a notebook filled with measurements and lessons inherited from her mother. Neither hurried the other. In November, Nathan drove her beyond the north pasture. An old farmhouse stood there beneath bare cottonwoods. Inside were new pine floors, a repaired roof, and a restored stove flue. The kitchen had a broad, east-facing window. Margaret walked toward it. Morning light would fall directly across the work table. You did this. Most of it. She turned. What are you saying, Nathan? I'm not saying it yet. He held the lantern lower. I'm showing you first. Margaret looked around that empty kitchen and saw too much. Dough rising, Rose in the doorway. Emily talking while pretending not to steal crust trimmings. Nathan's boots beside hers. Years. Her chest tightened. I've spent my whole life being the woman people walk past. Nathan crossed the room, but stopped before he crowded her. You've been the woman people walk toward for a long time. She looked at him. You just weren't looking at who was walking. He reached for her hand. Nothing more. Margaret let him take it. On the ride home, the mountains were black beneath a sky crowded with stars. For months, Margaret had been afraid Nathan would stop coming. Now she understood the greater danger. She wanted him to keep coming. Not only Sunday, Friday too. Spring, the farmhouse, Emily, Rose, all of it. And for the first time in her life, Margaret had enough to lose that losing it frightened her. Winter settled hard over Willow Creek. By December, snow covered the wagon ruts north of town, and by February, the Sunday market had moved inside the church hall. Margaret's table stood along the east wall, where the heat from the iron stove carried cinnamon, baked apples, and molasses through the crowded room. She took special orders now. Agnes's daughter came to her kitchen on Saturdays with a little notebook. Emily kept one too. Rose simply assumed Margaret would be at supper every Friday. Nathan never pushed. When Margaret mentioned that an oven shelf had warped, he repaired it. When snow made the flour wagon late, he brought 2 sacks from his ranch stores. When darkness came early, he rode beside Margaret's cart until her house lantern appeared ahead. He never called these things courtship. Neither did she. Then one February Sunday, Nathan bought 2 pies and did not leave. Walk with me a minute. They moved near the side door. Cold air slipped beneath it. Behind them came the ordinary sounds of Willow Creek. Coins on tables, boots on floorboards, women talking, someone laughing near the stove. Nathan faced her. "I've been showing you for months because I wasn't sure I could say it right." Margaret's pulse began to climb. "I love you, Margaret." Nothing in the room stopped, yet everything in her did. Nathan continued quietly. "I love that you show up when leaving would be easier. I love that when a child asks you something, you give her a real answer. I love that you work until something is right, instead of until it's good enough." His eyes stayed on hers. "You make my girls feel safe. A breath. You make me want tomorrow again." Margaret swallowed. One question had been waiting beneath every Sunday. "Was it the pie?" Nathan almost smiled. "The pie made me stop." She waited. "The memory made me buy the first one." Then the smile finally came. Warm, certain, entirely his. But every Sunday after that, he stepped a little closer. "Margaret, it was always you." She looked down because 30 years did not disappear in one sentence. "You don't have to make this kinder than it is." "I'm not." Nathan reached inside his coat. He took out a folded document. Not a love letter, a deed. Margaret opened it. Margaret Ann Dawson. Her name stood in this county clerk's careful hand. "The farmhouse?" "Yours." She stared at him. "If I say no?" "Still yours." "Nathan, no trade, no debt, no condition." His voice softened. "I wanted you to have ground beneath your feet that nobody could take away because you didn't please them." Then came the ring. Simple gold. Built to last. "I can't promise easy," he said. "I can promise I'll keep showing up." Margaret thought of 6 pies, $9, a cold kitchen, boys laughing, stand 14, Rose's hand, Emily searching the festival crowd for her, the east window, Nathan walking toward her table again and again. "There isn't a version of me," she'd said slowly, "that walks away from a man who kept coming back." Nathan waited. "Yes." His breath left him. Margaret laughed softly. "Yes, Nathan." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Spring fought its way into Montana by inches. Snow became mud. Creeks ran high. Green pushed through winter-brown pasture. In April, Margaret moved into the farmhouse. She owned few things. Rose carried the most important one, the old recipe book. She held it with both hands and placed it on the shelf beside the east-facing kitchen window. The first Saturday in May, Margaret Dawson married Nathan Brooks in the same church where she had spent 8 months selling pies. Emily stood beside her father. Rose held Margaret's hand. Margaret wore the blue dress from those first market Sundays, altered now so the dress fit Margaret comfortably, instead of Margaret apologizing for fitting the dress. When she said, "I do," Nathan's shoulders finally relaxed. The following Sunday, Willow Creek found something new where Margaret's little table had once stood, a larger wooden stand. Above it hung a sign lettered carefully by Emily. "Dawson and Brooks Family Bakery." Margaret read it twice. "Dawson first?" Nathan carried a crate behind the counter. "You were doing it first." The line formed before they finished setting up. Mrs. Henderson came. Agnes and her daughter came. Reverend Aldous came. Patricia came. Then Clara Hutchkins waited quietly until her turn. "The sweet potato," she said. $2. Clara paid full price. She took the pie. "It's good to see you here." Margaret held her gaze. "It's good to be here." Clara nodded and moved on. Margaret reached for another cinnamon apple. Then someone tugged gently at her sleeve. Rose. For once, the child hesitated. "Mama?" Margaret stopped. Emily went still. Several feet away, Nathan heard it too. Margaret crouched until she and Rose were eye to eye. "What is it, sweetheart?" Rose glanced seriously toward the display. We're almost out of cinnamon apple. Margaret laughed. Not the careful laugh she once used around strangers. Not something held behind a still face. A full, warm laugh that carried across the Sunday market. Nathan looked at her. Margaret met his eyes. She did not look away. Behind them stood the church, wagons and saddle horses. Beyond Willow Creek, the Montana mountains rose beneath a clear spring sky. Emily marked inventory. Rose took Margaret's hand. Nathan lifted another crate onto the table, and beside the till rested an old recipe book stained with blackberry, coffee, butter, and years. Margaret's mother had once told her she made beautiful things. For most of her life, Margaret had believed she meant pies. Now she understood. The town had changed its mind late. Nathan had loved her. 2 little girls had chosen her. But none of those things had created her worth. They had only helped her finally see what had been there before the first pie was ever sold. Margaret Dawson Brooks had spent years making herself smaller, so the world would have less to reject. Now her name hung first above the table. Her ring caught the spring light. Her daughter's hand rested inside hers, and the cowboy who had once crossed a market for apple cinnamon was walking toward her again, carrying another crate because there was work to do, and because that was how Nathan loved. He showed up. So did Margaret, Sunday after Sunday, until one day showing up had become a life. Maybe that is why Margaret's story stays with us, because most lives are not changed by one grand moment. Sometimes they are built quietly, in cold kitchens before sunrise, in long rides down frozen roads, in a child's hand reaching for yours, and in one good man returning when you are still afraid he might not. Imagine yourself behind Margaret's little pie table. Imagine carrying years of rejection so quietly that you have almost mistaken loneliness for safety. Then imagine someone seeing you without asking you to become smaller first. Nathan did not heal Margaret by choosing her, and Margaret did not erase the life Nathan had shared with Eleanor. They gave each other something gentler, permission to hope again. Maybe second chances are like that. They do not ask us to forget the people we lost or pretend the years did not hurt. They simply ask whether, after all of it, we are willing to leave one small place in our hearts open for what might still come. If Margaret's journey reminded you of a time when you kept showing up even when it was hard, tell me in the comments what gave you the strength to continue. And if you would like to spend more evenings with stories of frontier love, family, healing, mystery, and people finding their way home, I hope you'll subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, remember Margaret's mother. Sometimes the beautiful thing you are making is your own life.